You could do this on a 1 million hectare landscape. You could do it on a 100,000 hectare landscape. Here we just did it on an 11,000 hectare landscape. The thing about climate adaptation is there's very few places that people can point to on the ground where that big picture theory and ecology goes through to the land base and actually affects the decisions in a sort of systematic way. So that's what I took as my challenge, was to take these theories and see how to apply them on the 11,000 hectares that we manage here. So our climate adaptation work started with a risk assessment, and that's looking, in our case, specifically at the risks to homes, to biodiversity, to water, and to timber from drought and fire. The tricky part is to then take that risk assessment and figure out what to do about it in the operational stage. So we used a framework which groups adaptation actions into 3 general categories, which are sort of a sliding scale, but there's a resistance, resilience, and then more of a transition approach. We did develop a way of thinking about it, which has to do with putting the site in question in its landscape context and looking at what the values that are the most important are for that site. So the degree to which the current conditions and the desired or feasible future conditions are compatible determines whether you're more in a resistance space or a resilience or transition space. So we are in Lower Proctor Creek. Proctor Creek itself is right over there, and the village of Proctor is right behind us. The older trees in here are between 140 and 160, maybe 180 years old. Because low elevation old growth is rare in this area was designated right from the beginning in the late 90s as a reserve area, i.e. we would not log it. Because it's rare and because it has these old forest attributes and we don't want it to burn, and yet it's at risk of burning, we decided to use a resistance strategy here as part of our adaptation work. But you have to look at the stand in the context of what's around it. It's 15 hectares of older forest surrounded by hundreds and thousands of hectares of mature forest. So resistance in this context means we're reducing the fire risk around the perimeter of the stand by doing heavy fuel treatment on the edges, and we're right up against the creek as well. And then we thinned out the understory adjacent to a couple of old trails, so there's defensible spaces within here. But other than doing these light fuel treatments within the stand and the fuel treatments around the edges of the stand, we're not planning to do any major work in this area. That's why it's a resistance strategy. It's a defensive strategy. So we are leaving this resistance example site, and we are going to go down the road to a resilience site. So here we are on our resilience example site. Given that high density forest that included some fire and drought adapted species like the fir and the larch, but also a lot of cedar that generally wasn't all that healthy. Given that we had some of the components of the ecosystem, of the structure that we thought were well suited, and also some that were less, that's a good example of the kind of place where we can shift the stand somewhat towards being a more drought and fire adapted stand without wholesale trying to replace it. What we did is we did partial cut logging in here. We took out probably 60 10% of the canopy and left all of the healthy large Douglas fir larch pine. This is a stand that in the 60s was deciduous leading. Our hope was that by opening up enough to get that aspen to sucker and go for the light, that we could keep a certain amount of coniferous component, but really add in that aspen component. This stand is very much looking like the desired future condition over the next several decades. We've got the big, well-established, healthy conifer trees, but they're well-spaced, and we have relatively low flammability in the short term, and we have larch and fir and a little bit of ponderosa pine and white pine coming in here, and those are better adapted to drought than the cedar that was really quite thick in here before. So this is an example of one of our transition sites. What this forest was like was there was some heavy high-grade logging done in the 70s and 80s in behind Proctor. So they took all the fir, larch, and any valuable cedar that was there, and they just left some sort of half knocked over hemlock and a few older cedar with rot and a few little trees. But there's been 40 years of growth. So we came in and we looked at this like, wow, this is a firebomb. This site is getting drier and drier, and the most drought-adapted, fire-adapted species had been removed. Luckily, what grew up in here was a real mix. It was mostly hemlock and cedar, but fir and larch and birch and aspen came up in here. So based on that, we looked at the site, said, okay, the trajectory that this stand is on, because of its history, is a trajectory that is not compatible with wildfire risk reduction, not great for biodiversity. It's just not a very healthy stand that's maintaining values that are important to us. So in order to get it on a trajectory that's more suited to climate, drought and fire, we need to create more growing space to get other species on the site, and primarily deciduous herbs and shrubs and trees. At the end of the day, there's probably 20% retention in here. I realized that if we did a light touch and opened it up just a little bit, what would we be promoting? More cedar hemlock. We were trying to move away from the cedar hemlock. We were trying to get the deciduous in here. In order to do that, we needed to open it up a fair bit. It was extremely successful. This is about 6 years ago that we did the logging. We've planted a few ponderosa pine, and everything else that we see that's come up in here has come up naturally. There's a fair bit of aspen, there's huckleberry coming in, thimbleberry, saskatoon, you name it. And our objective for this stand was to transition it from the dense cedar hemlock trajectory that it was on to a very different trajectory. My mandate has continued to shift. It started as watershed protection, light touch forestry, community-based management. It's all of those things still. And now we have to figure out how to do watershed protection, ecosystem-based forestry, and wildfire risk reduction, and climate adaptation. So that's the tricky part, and that's the interesting part.